Thank you. So Jelena is a great musician and artist, but also a great technician, because I would not know how to put the simple microphone on its stand. Okay. So we are going to speak about Vojislav Nanović, also known as Voja Nanović. He was a great and well-known director in the post-war times in Yugoslavia. And he was, during the war, he was a member of the school kids organization. They were mostly still in the high school. During the occupation, they did a lot of sabotage, and they started to make harm to the occupying forces, German forces who were occupying Belgrade. So they would make a little sabotage things in these circumstances, but also producing little posters and destroying the propaganda press which was distributed in Belgrade by the Nazis. And anyway, he was an interesting personality and interesting case to know about. So as I said, Voja Lanović was only not even 19 when he started to do all these things. One of the, all the sabotage stuff and everything. And one of the things that he did is something that probably the people of our generation will do as well. He was producing a small art, do-it-yourself art stencils, not bigger than this. And they would say something like death to fascism and freedom to the people. And he was, they would make very simple stencils on paper, which they would glue on some of the parts of the town. They would just paste it on the wall. And it sounds like not a great big thing to do against such a huge force like the occupied forces that were in Belgrade. But it was something that probably we can understand, because you can see that I was doing self-published stuff ever since I started to work on comics, and it's been decades. And to know that they did something like that years ago is something which gives you strength and give you will to continue. So this is the actual reconstruction of the little pamphlet that they did, the little stencil that was put, it was just pasted on the walls in the streets of Belgrade, and it speaks just about the same thing that you can say with the mini comics or small editions of small press things. It's just that change is starting with a small thing. It's something that rolls on after you begin to work on it. And this group of high school kids, to him Vojanović belonged, they were doing all kind of sabotage. Some of it was really dangerous, and they didn't know how to use, for example, flammable material. And they were throwing some of the petrol at the trucks. by the Nazis. And in one case, he burned his coat, and he had to, after the explosion of the truck, and so he had to actually run away from the place of the sabotage with his coat in flames. And but there were several successful actions by these young people, and soon Voja Nanović was chosen to be the leader of the group. So he, just as a 19-year-old kid, he has started to make ideas about the future actions, and he coordinated this group of people of young people who were doing that. It turned out that these actions and sabotages were not enough to scare the occupiers, and so the head of the resistance, which was then in the heavy confinement, they were quite, they were part of the very deep conspiracy, so you were not able to know their names or where they lived and stuff like that. They told these young people that this is not enough just to make a sabotage. like that, like they did before. For example, they would burn the occupying propaganda papers on the newsstands and do things like that. They said to them and to Vojanović as a leader of this group, there were probably about 10 of them or something like that. So it's a small group actually. And they told them, you should go on any chosen street of Belgrade and you should kill a German officer. And it's better if it's an SS officer. And so a lot of them, they had already some of the weapons, like bombs and guns, but they never shoot it with any weapons. They were just teenagers who lived their lives in these difficult times. So they would go and they went as they were told. They stand in front of one of the walls, all with guns in their pockets, and they were waiting for somebody who could be the target of their attack. They stand for one day. They said whole day they were just hanging around in front of the wall, but they didn't shoot anyone. They said that after it was over, after the day was over, they had like a meeting where Vojanović said that he was afraid that he couldn't shoot. And then they decided even more decidedly that tomorrow they're going to do that. So they went another day and they were waiting in front of the wall.
But they didn't shoot anyone.
First day, no. turned to their wall and they stood in front of it, waiting for something, who knows what, to happen. And they were, at some moment, they saw a very young Nazi officer who was maybe just a few years older than they were. He was very young. And Vojanović, he nodded his head, and but nobody has been shooting. So it was some young officer, lieutenant or something, and he already passed the group of these youngsters when Vojanović said, "Hey," and he turned his head, and he said, Vojanović said that he can see the fear in his eyes. He was just too surprised that something like that would happen. And the next that happened is that Nanovic took out the gun and shot at him. And he said, I didn't have the feeling that he was falling down on the pavement or dying or something. I had more experience that it was like he was just shrinking away and turning into a liquid. Nobody actually reacted around them. Even there were some Nazi soldiers, but they all ran away. Nobody tried even to shoot after these kids. Everybody was too afraid of such a sudden situation. So it ended up like this. So some of the activists were actually arrested after this action and shooted in front of the firing squad, these kids. And so Nanović decided to go hide for some time, and he went to the graveyard, and he was hiding there for some time, which was very difficult because the weather was, I think it was fall, and the weather was bad, but he was just hiding behind some of the tombstones and underneath some of the benches which were there, which he found there at the graveyard. Sometimes that he spent in hiding, Nanović, he decided to go at least for one night at his parents' place and to sleep there. It happened that only at that moment there were two agents who knocked on the door while he was there. And he managed at one moment to jump into the toilet and to destroy the important documents by flashing the toilet. But then the agents went after him and they were beating him so badly that he was completely covered with blood. And that is how he entered the police car, the Nazi police car. So in the next moment, the police officers, they just pulled Vojanović inside the police car. And at some point they have stopped in order to arrest another guy. And at that moment, he managed to open the door of the police car. He jumped outside and he started to run. They were shooting at him, but it was not successful. He managed to escape, which was a kind of a strange and incredible situation. And after this, Nanović managed to escape to the partisans. Not to mention while he was running away that he was covered with blood and he was barefooted and without shoes. But he miraculously managed to escape the shooting which was getting after him. And he was what is even less known in Serbia. He was while he joined the partisans, he was also printing the magazine made for the children, and he created comics inside of them, of these magazines. So it was a kind of a strange situation, because he was this young guy with the gun in his hand, but he would change the gun for the pen at some points, and he would create comics. It was 1944, I think. So it was a strange story. Actually, after the war, he started to work on some of the first movies which were made in the afterwar times in Yugoslavia. He made what is the third ever made movie in the new Yugoslavia. And for this movie, which is called Eternal Youth, he invited young people to come and to play what was going on only a few years before that, because it was 1948. And so they play themselves. They didn't have any experience in acting. And the film crew, they didn't know much about the film technology. So it was all made just because of the enthusiasm. And it was just the start of his movie career. He did several, I think 8 movies and many documentaries. Before, in 1963, he moved to the United States, where he had the film house in New York, where he was doing, again, documentaries, and he did some educational films and many other things. And what is interesting is that I have found, just by a chance, I have found one comic made in the early 60s, I think, in the United States, where one of the characters was named Nanovic. So I think it's not just a coincidence. The comic was made by somebody who knew Vojan Nanovic. And in the 70s and in the 80s, he returned to Yugoslavia to make some more mostly documentary films, and he became something of a legend of the Yugoslav cinematography. Even though most of the people, they just didn't realize what he did during the war, and he never spoke much about it. I have found just one article published in the late 50s or early 60s, where he explained about some of the experiences that he had during the wartime. Say in the center of this hurricane which was going on in his country at that moment when he was young. And it remains a little bit of what is going on now in Serbia with the student protests, where again the young people are changing the situation in the country. And in my comic I compared this situation, this big, huge crisis that happened in Serbia with the cry of the rabbit. You know, rabbit, it's a creature which is silent most of his life, but when approached to the deadly danger, it makes scream. And so I think this situation in Serbia was like a rabbit scream. And in these circumstances, it was the young people again who came to change the situation, and that is how the student protest was born. At this moment, most of the people there, they hope that the young people will bring change. So it's not like in most of the societies where people ask for a change from the wise old man. They ask now teenagers or the young people to tell them what to do, how to change the society. So it's a very important moment for all of us.